Hey, y'all, welcome in. It's Basketball by Association. My name is Arky. That is Joel. Joel, hello, sir.
Hey, it's episode 59, and you know, rather than taking the MVP from 1959, which was Bob Pettit, who's a guy who was a really productive player in the NBA, there's no denying that, but at a time, a very segregated time in the United States, it's always been kind of looked back as, was he really the MVP at that time, or was this kind of a laudatory thing that the NBA gave him? I'm not throwing shade on his career. I'm throwing shade on his MVP candidacy. I'm going to go in 1959 with the Rookie of the Year because, again, no one in NBA history has worn the number 59. So all you kids out there who are getting to the league someday, think about that. Maybe you could be the first pioneer of the number 59. But let's go with the Rookie of the Year. He is a guy that we discussed not too long ago, a few weeks ago, when author Bob Kuska was on the program, and he was talking about a couple of his books that he's published, including one, and some conversations with this guy, the great and unfortunately late Elgin Baylor, who was Rookie of the Year in the year 1959 with the Minneapolis Lakers, back when the Lakers were respectable. All right, it's the Elgin Baylor episode.
Okay, all right. We'll try to do it.
That's a Minnesota dig from me.
Can I tell you something that I think is a very, very surprising thing to me is that there haven't been more players. Like, I'm surprised that in 2021 that there are any numbers that haven't been worn. Like, I feel like if I was a player and I wasn't just madly in love with 23, 17s, and 19s, and what, like, if
number 8.
Yeah, if I didn't think that like Kobe looked good on me and I wanted to pay homage to the guy every 14 seconds, then I would go look at the numbers that had never been used, and I'd be the guy, right? Like, I'd be like, no matter what your career is going to be, at least you would be the 59.
Right. And you would, and that's an awesome point. I've never thought of that one before. And taking it a step further, especially if you're a guy who's like, you're on the fringe, you might be a cup of coffee type of guy in the league, and you're there, you're cutting your teeth, whatever, but you don't know how your career is going to pan out, you're probably undrafted. Wouldn't that even be higher incentive to go, look, I'm here. I don't know how long I'll be here, but I could be number 59. I could be the only guy that ever wore that. It is surprising. I think it is a testament to just how few NBA players there are historically. Like, when you look at the NBA roster versus a sport, like football or Major League Baseball, where the roster sizes are just so much bigger. And in baseball's case, the game has been around for so much longer too. The amount of people who have passed through the NBA is just surprisingly small. So that does play a part into it. But you're right, with all those different numbers to choose from, it's surprising more guys have not done it. But every once in a while you get weird, fun things, like Taj Gibson, isn't he like number 74 or something that he's been wearing for a couple years, and he's done that for his his zip code or something like that. So that's fun. Like, I respect that you got somebody thinking outside the box later in his career.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. It at least gives you a little something to hang on to. Listen, like, if maybe Kwame Brown probably thought he was going to be something, right? So, but when you get 2 years in, 3 years in, it's not looking great, let's switch it up a little bit, right? Listen, you don't know how, actually you don't. You see the writing on the wall, right? Like, if you're Anthony Bennett, right? Use that moment or two, and put a little stank on it.
See, the tough thing with those top draft picks are, and when you go back and talk to people and read the stories, like, a lot of them don't see that moment. It comes so much faster than you'd anticipate, where you're an upside guy or a high draft pick, whatever, and then all of a sudden, as soon as that upside shine is worn off, you're in big trouble without the production. Like, there are not unlimited chances in the NBA, and it's a testament to guys who have built up. So you think of like the end of Allen Iverson's career or Carmelo Anthony's career that looked dead in the water at one point. It's a testament to their greatness, actually, their previous greatness and the cachet that they built up. but they were able to get all those other chances based on name. And in Carmelo's case, good on him. He's been able to capitalize on that and keep it going and evolve a little bit and that sort of thing and get more chances because of that. But if you don't have that cachet built up, you've got maybe like 1-2 other teams that are going to look at you if you didn't pan out with your first one. It's just the way it goes.
That is true. Like you don't, there are not a lot of like NFL teams who will just keep trading you around for a few, maybe 2 or 3 more seasons than you expect,
right?
Just to give you a shot because different fits, different systems, maybe. No, and with the NBA, it's like, listen, either you can shoot or you can't. You can play defense or you can't.
Right. Like, and when you're young, you're coming in as a 20-year-old kid, you may have those 2-3 more chances based on upside. But when you hit 26 to 28 years old, it's done. You're going overseas. And then maybe if you prove something over there, somebody will give you a training camp invite to come back and see what you can do. But that's probably your last chance again.
Yeah. Someone who's not going to worry about any overseas time. I want to start this off with the loss of Bradley Beal for 2 games for the Washington Wizards. Some tightness in his right hamstring. He is going to be out. No major damage, it seems. But he's missing 2 games, and there's only 4 left. The dude scored 50 in the game. That he had to leave. The one that went to overtime against was Indiana.
He got so hot his wrist started to hurt.
That's right. And it's so interesting too because that's also apparently Russell Westbrook's favorite team to go against ever. By the way, did you know that he has the Indiana's the team he has the most triple doubles against? What a weird stat to have. It's like 18, and like it's tied for like he just loves playing Indiana for whatever reason. But listen, we can get to Russell Westbrook in a minute. I want to ask about Bradley Beal because he was up for the scoring title with Steph Curry, and those 2 guys were going neck and neck every single night. In fact, that night that he scored 50 and wasn't able to play in overtime, Steph scored 49 to maintain his lead, slight lead, decimal point leads in the scoring title chase. But what does the loss of Bradley Beal in 2 of the last 4 games, including a big one tonight against Atlanta, what does that mean for Washington and their chances? Because they've been very good as of late. They've gone up from the 10 spot to the 9 spot since we last spoke. And it seemed like they were making their way towards like being much more comfortable with where they were. What does that loss mean?
Obviously it's huge because of all the statistical impact that you just talked about, and it's not only the stats that he pours in, it's the gravity he creates, it's the attention that the defense has to pay on him, which now they don't have to do that with his backups, and we'll get to them in a minute. So much more attention gets put onto Russell Westbrook, who's been in absolute superhuman mode for the last few months, but even in superhuman mode, it's nice to have some superhero sidekicks, right? You need the rest of the Avengers. And so it does get tough. Washington's got a middling schedule here. Remember, no Denny Avdia, who was in their starting lineup, even though he's been up and down, but he's out for right now as well. It means a ton more minutes for Raul Neto, if depending on how you pronounce it. The announcers usually drop the R. Garrison Matthews is another guy who's gotten a lot of burn this year and is you get the sense that they want Garrison Matthews to be their clone of Duncan Robinson, an unheralded 3-point shooting guy who's just there to knock down those shots and create that type of gravity when Beal is off the floor. And Garrison Matthews is by no means even a poor man's Duncan Robinson yet, but he has been very effective in that role, actually sneaky effective for them because people have to pay attention to him. And that's really all it's about. Especially when you have, Davis Bertans, who's really taken a fall off a cliff this year for Washington. So it's going to be Neto. It's going to be Matthews. Both of those guys have done very effective work. It means Westbrook goes off the ball a little bit more than normal because Neto is a guy that they like to have on the ball. And Westbrook is going to be getting into it now more in cuts and transition and pushing it up when he can. Neto can play off and knock down some shots. They're surprisingly thin in their backcourt when Beal is out, just because now it's Neto, it's Garrison Matthews. You'll see Ish Smith play a little bit. Chandler Hutchinson, who was picked off the scrap heap. There's a young guy exactly like we had in our open, a young guy who's getting his second chance after kind of flaming out with the Chicago Bulls. He was a higher draft pick there. he's done some okay things. And then up front, Daniel Gafford, Rui Hachimura, young guys, it's your time to shine and pick up the load here if Washington is going to be a playoff team and take advantage of this, because the scary thing is, as bad as Washington was and disjointed and injured at the beginning of the year, they're just outside of not having to play in the play-in tournament. Like, how crazy is that? So Beal going down is at a bad time, but Washington's not like out of this. They're 5 games off, but I doubt Miami will drop enough.
Yeah, no, they I don't think they're going to be able to get into the safely in. But again, they still can move up to where they would have sort of a little bit of an advantage going into that play-in tournament. And you talk about sort of the death behind Bradley Beal at that spot, and I mean, for the last 2.5 months or so, that the majority of the time that both he and Russell have been able to play together, when they have been able to play together, they play a ton of minutes, and they've had to. They play like 42, 44 minutes per game or something, and they kind of have to, because their defense is miserable. They have to score a ton of points, and they've had to win all these games just to get back, because of the hole they dug themselves into early on in the season, that they've had to exhaust their players. And now it's coming down to the last 4 games where, yeah, it feels like that they're going to be able to make it in, but like if they lose these 2 games, there's a real shot that they go from this great story to possibly out, even though the play-in, because they've been so hot. But part of it's been because both those guys, Bradley and Russell, have been able to score so much.
And they've had to. Yeah, they've had to. And those 2 guys that I pointed out in Neto and Matthews are scoring just under 9 and just under 6 points per game, respectively. Now they're hitting about 40% of their threes, and that's the key thing for a Washington team that chucks a lot, but neither of those guys are big 3-point shooters. So yeah, it's this literally is kind of a 2-man show with a couple of pieces that fit nicely. And I talk about Gafford as a rim finisher, doing what Thomas Bryant was supposed to do before he got hurt at the very beginning of the season. And Rui Hachimura, who's kind of a 5-tool player, but is so young that you're not really sure which of those tools you can rely on a nightly basis. Like, that's all good. But everything else are bit players. I mean, it's no disrespect. They're bit players. And now you're asking them to go out and win games. And I mean, just when you think that Westbrook can't do more, he's going to be asked to do more in these situations. And I mean, given what we've seen this season, I guess you put your money on Russ and you feel pretty good about it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, you kind of like I don't know, honestly. Like, I'm almost out of words to describe the type of season that Russell Westbrook has had. And we still have 4 games to go, and maybe whatever kind of postseason tournament that they might be able to have run will be, adding some superfluous commentary onto it. But it's been so, like, the betting odds are heavy minuses, which means like -200, -300, which means it's a heavy favorite to happen, that he has a triple-double. And like, he's hitting all these numbers for people. Like, normally you shouldn't be able to guarantee a triple-double in a game. And he has it. He has some of the most insane stat lines of modern basketball that I've ever seen. And it's over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, that like, you have to go back to like 1965 basketball to see some of the really weird numbers. Like, who was it that I saw a post? They had like 59 points, 24 rebounds, 13 blocks. Like it. To see stat lines like this,
and those are honestly Bob Pettit numbers, to like circle back to the top of the show.
Yeah.
And a guy that I'm not trying to give disrespect to, those are crazy, crazy numbers. And that was a guy who was like carrying a team where he was the man, and there wasn't a ton of other stat producers around him. Like,
yeah,
I'm nuts.
For example, this last game, Russ, 33, 19, and 15, right? And the game before was 13, 17, and 17, 29, 12, and 17, 14, 21, 24. Like, these are stupid. 37, 11, and 11. Like, these are just silly, silly lines that he's putting up literally almost every night.
And you know what's crazy about it is that this was not the Russell Westbrook narrative during the first few months of the season, right? He had a couple big games, but then he was out. And then he'd come back, and then he'd be out. And Bradley Beal wasn't healthy either, and Beal would put up some big games, and then he would be out. And the Wizards were just not winning, even though Russ would get some nice stat lines. It really has been like the second half of the season where all of a sudden Westbrook has been consistently healthy. The numbers just continue to climb, as you've talked about. Beal has been there enough, at least, and the wins have started to pile up, and now Westbrook is getting that appreciation. And it does, like, as crazy as this is and as historic as this has been, you just kind of look back and go, what if they had both been healthy
right
earlier and had gotten through the learning curve of this new team and new dynamic? Because you're talking these two phenomenal scorers plus a bunch of young guys, right? A bunch of really young guys and somebody like Bertans who just hasn't looked right all year. But there was that learning curve of chemistry. If you had been able to get through that in the first 10 games instead of taking 25 games to get through because nobody was around, like, are we talking slam dunk MVP season for Russell Westbrook and a Wizards team that is in the top 6 because they won 5 more games than they did, and that's all they need right now? Like, that's how crazy and how much of a margin and how much momentum there's been over this second half of the season out of Washington.
It's just, it's kind of like we should give it more like recognition because of how wild it is, even though it's but because it's at the bottom of the standings, we sort of don't get to enjoy a lot of discussion about it. I do want to discuss, speaking of injuries, LeBron James, who is eyeing to come back tomorrow against my Knicks. Tom Thibodeau rubbing his hands together like, okay, buddy, you bring that hardo suit back over here. We'll take you out the whole time. And if not on Tuesday, maybe Wednesday against Houston. The Lakers did get back on the winning track on Sunday by beating the Suns, but it has been a grind down the stretch to sort of end this season. The regular season ends this Sunday. They got 4 games left. What kind of momentum do you think LeBron James, even if he comes back tomorrow for all 4 of those games, what kind of momentum does this Lakers team feel like it can get going toward the playoffs?
Honestly, these are all playoff games for them now. The playoffs have started. It doesn't matter who the opponent or whether it's an actual series or a singular game. As much as it sounds cliche, like, that is the dogfight they're in. And to steal the old, like, very famous Kevin Garnett phrase, it's time to bring your Uzis, bring your gats, unload the clips. Like, there's nothing, you have to lay it all out there now. There's no more trying to ease into this. So whatever LeBron James can give you, you're going to need it. You have to take it. The good news is Anthony Davis over the last couple games is really looking like he's knocking off the rust. And even though he's gotten a couple of those dinged up injuries again, which always make you wince because he is just a guy who has been a magnet for that stuff. And he did it last night against Phoenix too. It was a calf injury or wrist thing. He says he's fine enough to go, and you just hope that's the truth. But he's been out there. He's looked good. Guys are playing a lot more freely alongside him. There's that predictability you and I talked about last week. And, you know, Phoenix, second best team in the Western Conference. The Lakers played good enough defense that they kept Phoenix out of a rhythm. Phoenix never got into a rhythm, which is, again, a sign of a younger team button up against playoff level competition. Because what do you do when you can't find that rhythm and you have to manufacture points on a possession by possession basis, but you're never going to feel good about it, right? And then you got to go down on the other end and lock somebody down. That's just the nature when they talk about playoff basketball slowing down. That's what I saw in watching that game last night. I saw the Lakers locking in a lot more effectively on that defensive end because of that predictability. And they had most of their guys there. You know, Dennis Schroeder is still out, but they got really nice minutes in their backcourt last night from not only Caruso, but Kentavious Caldwell-Pope had a great game, 17 points. Talen Horton-Tucker was on point. They're going to need that. It's got to be that cohesiveness. Ben McLemore gave them some good minutes as well. So just fight, take that game by game basis. Whatever LeBron can give you as an orchestrator is going to be very helpful. Don't gas LeBron by making him a lead defender at this point. He's got to be in the system defense, but not a lead guy.
Mm-hmm.
And let's remember that this Lakers team, where did they hang their hat at the beginning of the season when they were playing so well and they were healthy? They did it on the defensive end, right? By being huge, by being physical, by being a Frank Vogel style team where they were on the same page. And when they lost that recently due to injuries and due to roster upheaval, that was what eroded. And that's when they've looked really mediocre. The offense should be good enough most of the time, but it'll be on that defensive end. And a healthy Anthony Davis, who now seems to understand a little bit better how to play with Andre Drummond and vice versa, that is where you're going to anchor things even more than LeBron, honestly.
Yeah, and they're one spot right now out of the safety of getting a series into the playoffs, behind Portland, who they just lost to on Friday night. And that's sort of unfortunate. But if you're looking for the Lakers, the schedule coming up is really, really good this week. You have the Knicks, who may want to go super hard to end their road trip by punching in the mouth. But Tom Thibodeau, I don't think is going to find any need to relent because he's still trying to get a home playoff series.
Right. And his teams always do, they always play that way, even if they're 20-63 or they're at the very end of the season. Like, he just doesn't rest his guys. They'll come full strength on that.
But then you get your last home game against the Rockets, who are legitimately miserable.
Right.
Then they go to Indiana, who is also miserable right now. Like they can't defend anything.
Right.
And then you finish the season in New Orleans, where you take on a Zion-less Pelicans, whose Zion's out with a hand fracture. So that team sort of playoff run that we were,
and they may or may not have Brandon Ingram either, because he's questionable right now too.
That is a good point. So 3 of the last 4 games, very, very, very winnable, and I'd argue 4 of the 4 are very winnable games for them. It's not a murderous row for them to sort of maybe make up that one game and save themselves a play-in game, because right now, if they were to start, they got Steph Curry, man.
And that's scary. And you and I talked about last week on the BbA Bite, not only the scariness of being in a single game situation and running up against the wrong team, but then also just the fact that some of those matchups down there in those 7, 8, 9, 10 spots are legitimately concerning for an older Lakers team if they're not healthy. Honestly, getting up into that 6th seed, it's not only about getting to be in a series at that point and not have to do the single game thing, but it's also the extra rest, right? It's letting Anthony Davis have a couple extra days to get through some of these bumps and scrapes, letting a couple extra days of runway for Dennis Schroeder to hopefully work through the COVID-19 protocol and then be available, and LeBron to just not put more mileage on what he's dealing with right now, because that's going to be so critical. So yeah, these games, every single one, it does not matter the opponent, even if they're a sisters of the poor team like the Rockets. They're absolutely playoff games at this point, and you unload everything you have to win that game. And then when you have the game won, you rest your guys. Then you give them that instance, but don't play cute with it and go, oh, it's the Rockets. Anthony Davis is going to play 10 minutes tonight. No, secure the win, and you probably will. But you got to play with that urgency now. There cannot be any of this coasting, we'll flip the switch when we need it mentality that they had at the beginning of the year. Like, that does not apply any longer.
Well, on the flip side, here's what Portland's got coming up. They got the Rockets tonight at home. Then they go on the road for 2 and back home at 1. They're at Utah, at Phoenix, at home against Denver.
It's not good, except for the fact that Utah really only needs like one more win and a Phoenix loss, and they're probably going to start shutting things down a little bit to get ready for the playoffs, or at least throttling back.
Yeah, I think, but it's when does that game happen?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and for Phoenix, that's a tough one, because I don't think the Suns, where they're at, will throttle back at all. They want to stay in that 2nd seed. They still have a chance to overcome Utah. And being a less veteran team, I think maintaining momentum and keeping guys just locked in Whereas the Jazz will feel a little bit more comfortable going, our guys know what they need to do. And if we give them one night off here, we're a little more comfortable with that. Denver's kind of a crapshoot. They still have a chance to overtake the Clippers in that 3 seed, which would be important for them, but it could depend on who they're looking at matchups. And honestly, if I'm the Nuggets, I may want to face the Mavericks in the first round anyway, more than like the Blazers or the Lakers. So I might be content, especially with Aaron Gordon now mysteriously out. They might be jockeying for playoff position and may not actually be trying to get up into the 3 seed.
No, I completely concur with you on that. So I'm very interested to see. This is why the NBA added the 9-10 7 through 10 playoff, 9-10 allowed to sort of be competing, is that you can't just coast the last 2 weeks of the season. There's a lot to still be determined on both sides. I wanted to. The NBA came out and said that their last game, the regular season coming up this Sunday, all 30 teams, which is 15 games, they'll play between noon Eastern and 3:30 Eastern. They have 6 games on Saturday. They're all going to be the same afternoon times. So there is going to be even further issue just scoreboard watching and seeing who's where, unless somehow you get bogged down into a game that just goes forever and you decide to get out. The NBA doing everything that they can, and I like this, to try to keep teams from, unless you're like OKC or Houston, from just packing it in for the year.
And it gives that level of intrigue, like you just said, the scoreboard watching. You're going to have some races that hopefully come down to the wire. And there's been the purists out there and the people who suddenly are on the wrong end of this, like Luka Doncic for a little while until they jumped up, and like LeBron, who have complained about it. But honestly, like, everybody's talking about it, whether they love it or hate it. And this is not so far different than what football did with the wild card system, and adding another round in. It's not so different than what college football finally did with some playoff level stuff, or what Major League Baseball has done either, right? Expanding the field at the end. It's not getting rid of the elitism, the truly elite teams that earned that right to be there. If anything, they've earned more of that right. They've gotten more rest, more protection. It's not taking shine off that to open the field up a little bit. It's just saying, for those teams that are stuck in the middle class, like, you still have a chance. You still have a reason to continue playing, because you never know what might happen. And again, we're early on. It's the first season of this. I'm guessing there will be some tweaks to this system. There will be some improvement. And somewhere down the line, we will get somebody like a Sam Hinkie who will come in and analyze the current situation and just figure out how to ruin it for everybody, right? Because they'll manipulate the system. Like, that will happen too. That's human nature. And the league will have to adjust at that point. But for right now, I love this idea. I don't buy into, and we've said this before, I don't buy into the argument that it's somehow making things less competitive or rewarding the top teams less. It's making it so that a team like the Lakers can't do what they did, which is coast early on thinking, we'll be okay even if we hit some bumpy patches. Like, no, you needed to bank those wins, and now you got back down into the middle class with everybody else, and you're seeing how the real world lives, Lakers, and it's not always really pretty.
No, it's not. I think one of the last topics I want to get to talk to you about here is something that's happened in the Eastern Conference besides my Knicks dominating, and still hanging on to home court for the first round at least.
And might I add, not to get us too far off track, but what a quality win for them last night over the Clippers.
It was.
That
it
felt
really
like
was.
a playoff level effort from the Knicks.
From start to finish, and it wasn't like Kawhi's hurt and not playing. But no, it was a significantly well-coached, well-played game, and the Knicks played that game right into their wheelhouse. And granted, the Clippers are a team more likely, out of the West, to play that style, that they could get to play into that style, I think, than a couple of the teams they saw earlier on this road trip. But the fact, like, what was it, Denver the other night. It's just like, but from start to finish, they showed their muster and they showed their power, and that was a really, really impressive win. I don't want to sit here and just clam onto the Knicks though, because I'll actually get to do that during the playoffs, which would be awesome. But one of the teams that has gotten super hot is your new number 1 seed, Philadelphia 76ers. And we talked about it last week. Maybe it was last week or the week before, where Brooklyn losing James Harden and not keeping Kyrie and Kevin Durant all together at the same time make them vulnerable to lose the number 1 spot, and they did. I think they lost 4 in a row, I think, right after we were talking about that, and now they're 3 games back. They're probably going to be the number 2 seed now out of all this, which isn't a ton of difference when you go and sort of think about it, but Philadelphia seems to be playing the right type of basketball at the right time as the number 1 seed, and if you were to ask me, they're the team I would ride with right now to win the East.
Yeah, and no disrespect to the Knicks or the Hawks or the Heat, those who are in those 4 through 6 spots. But as good as those 3 teams are and have been, they don't generate the same type of danger that the Sixers, the Nets, or the Bucks do. So when you talk about falling out of the number 1 seed in this particular year with these particular 3 teams, it actually is very critical, because that means Brooklyn in the 2nd seed will have to go through the Bucks and the Sixers to get to the NBA Finals, whereas the Sixers sitting in number 1, they only have to go through one of those teams. Like there is some key advantage to that, but again, Miami could be really dangerous. We've talked about that. I think the Knicks could wind up surprising and giving a series in there too. We'll see if Atlanta's ready or not. Who knows? But Philadelphia is the team to ride with. I've been saying that through most of the year, and they've played that out in the standings anyway. Everything, however, comes down to, were they able to manage Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons properly, 2 kind of injury-prone guys, Embiid especially, manage them properly so that they are able to play full series. And it's been shaky with them too, but you just wonder, seeing how many teams have done this, how many guys have had rest days this year or minor injury days, or minor injury weeks. It's been up and down everybody's rosters, and you wonder how much of this is real versus a calculated approach to the fact that the season is truncated and that it's condensed a little bit, especially here on the back 9 of everything. So it's not to say, oh, Embiid and Simmons aren't dinged up. They probably are, but has the approach to rolling them out there changed? And so are they maybe a little more playoff ready than we thought, or has this truly been, because of the weird schedule and the weird year, just a more injury prone, kind of nagging injury type of season for a lot of these top teams? I don't know. I think it's more the approach, but yeah, Philadelphia, it's not just those top 2 players. And that, remember, Embiid, prior to getting hurt, like, he was our runaway MVP, right?
Yes,
he was the guy who was playing that well. And then Jokic caught some steam, and Embiid was sitting, and Curry's been doing his thing and has gotten back into this.
James Harden was scoring a bunch for a while, for like a month. We're like, hey, maybe this guy is the MVP. When you think about it, then he got hurt. Like, I think you make up a great point about what this season is, which is kind of like, it may end up being who dodged all the landmines the best, right? Like, especially when you talk about some of those teams that we were expecting to be really good, like the Lakers, like Philly, like Brooklyn. I think most people weren't expecting Phoenix to be this good right now. Thought they would come back there. Joe, we talked about it before. You thought they would come back there to some degree, and they really kind of have it. I thought Denver would be better, but they also got hurt. Like, it's been everyone's gotten hurt. Like, everyone's had, it feels like, a really significant injury. And if it's not your team, if you're not a top tier team, you didn't have that happen. If you're a middling team, you're a middling team sort of for a reason. Like, you may have stayed healthy, but you were sort of, you're where we kind of thought you would be, like Atlanta, for example. We didn't necessarily think they would be a top 2 seed, but 4 or 5, somewhere around there this year. I think it really is, though, this year, finding out, like, who dodged the landmines the best, not only to get to the playoffs, but by the time you get there, because what are the Lakers going to look like? What is Brooklyn going to look like? What is Joel Embiid going to be like? It seems like he's going to be fine, but who knows? What's Denver going to look like? What's Utah going to look like? Like it's so many teams where you're like, there's a lot of holes in a lot of these teams that, like, who's just going to be able to work through it?
And it's a perfect point in, you look at like the Phoenix Suns, for example. Who have they lost for major games this year due to injury or COVID? Basically nobody, right?
Nobody, yeah.
They've dodged those landmines, and they've did what they had to do, and they matured and have played really good basketball and all that stuff. But you're absolutely right. They have not had their key guys, knock on wood, they have not had any of their key guys miss major or ongoing sporadic time like that. And some of these other teams have, like Philadelphia, and they've been able to, navigate through that. It's a huge credit to the Atlanta Hawks, who have missed a ton of time up and down that roster, that then, Nate McMillan steps in, and they've just been able to plug and play guys and just keep chugging along. And you're right, it's not only dodging the landmines, but when one goes off, kind of knowing what to do with it and next man up sort of thing. But yeah, you look at Philly's roster, and if healthy, Philly does not lack for anything, right?
No. This team should have been your NBA finalist last year. I thought the team constructed it itself, and you can argue, well,
and they're better constructed this year, right? They're better.
I thought they were good enough last year, and you can argue about Brett Brown all you want. That's fine. It's a fair point to argue. This year, I think you're right. I think as much as we give the glitz and glamour to Brooklyn because they do have the top shelf names, like, this isn't just a solid Philadelphia team. This is a team built to win a title. Like, this is the kind of year that Philadelphia, like, if you don't make it out of the East, I get it if it's Brooklyn, maybe kind of sort of, if James Harden gets healthy by the time they get to you, blah, blah. This is kind of your year, right? Like, this feels like this is your year.
And by the way, this is a slight aside, but it's in agreement with you. If the Philadelphia 76ers win this NBA title, can we just change Danny Green's name to Robert Horry II? Like, because there is a guy who, you remember like what Bob Horry did, bouncing around between the Rockets and then the Lakers and the Spurs. And it seemed like everywhere he went, he had big moments and his teams just won. And he was a big supporting piece to that. And you look at where Green has been, won a ring with the Spurs. In fact, he might have 2 with the Spurs. I'd have to go back and look.
I think he has 2.
Won a championship with the Raptors. Played for the Lakers last year and won. And now is sitting on these Philadelphia 76ers, who I agree, as presently constructed, if healthy, should be your favorites to get out of the East and have a very good puncher's chance at an NBA Finals. And if he can get a ring with 4 different teams, like, that's an insane, not only Robert Horry level, but Horry didn't do it with 4 different teams. There's some mad respect to go on there. But you look, you've got Embiid, who you can manufacture offense with. Certainly players can get under his skin. He can get out of a rhythm. But that's why you have Ben Simmons as not only your facilitator, but your cutter, and Simmons' ability now to play a 4 position or a small ball 5, which some credit goes to Brett Brown for having experimented with that in previous seasons. And it seems like Doc Rivers knows it can't be a full-time one or the other thing. Like, he's not an either or. Ben Simmons is a both and type of player, and you roll him out depending on the lineup that you want in those different spots. They've got the shooting now with Seth Curry and Danny Green and Korkmaz coming off the bench. They've got a couple of really hardcore lockdown guys in Matisse Thybulle, and Tyrese Maxey has played some really nice minutes for them. Shake Milton has been like the young legs, the kind of unpredictable wild card type of guy that you've got. Tobias Harris is your steady guy who kind of just fills in a lot of the blanks. You don't want to over rely on him, but he's going to get a lot of the gaps and is just a solid pro. They're a little bit shallow up front, maybe, if all of a sudden you've got massive foul trouble and Dwight Howard is the only guy you're rolling out up front. But there again, Ben Simmons' ability to play small ball 5 is some insulation against that.
Yeah, and then you're stretching a little bit to find the holes in this team.
Right.
And like that's a great thing to have. Like that is a great great thing to have if you're Philly. By the way, Danny Green, I was wrong, has one with San Antonio,
Okay.
one with Toronto, and one with the Lakers. So Robert Horry, by the way, had 2 with Houston, 3 with the Lakers, and two with San Antonio.
So Green's not going to catch the total ring count, but the number of different teams to have won with will be pretty impressive.
Yeah, and Green could have done this without averaging more than 9 points in a game in a season. I should say, yeah. By the way, know all about Robert Horry, Mr. University of Alabama.
Yeah, I forgot about that, but yeah, good point.
You can't forget about that. It's the biggest deal. It's all we talk about here in Robert Horry. Some people are like, "You guys talk about college football too much." No, we talk Robert Horry all the time. So we do.
So instead of Roll Tide, it's Rob Tide, right?
It's Rob Tide, right? No, we talk about him and who else do we talk about? Charles Sprewell. So we talk about all the time. Yeah, Antonio McDyess. A lot of that.
Ooh, Dice Man. Yeah. Healthy young Antonio McDyess with the Nuggets is a guy, and this is dating myself horribly, but there are times where we go, oh man, I wish the young kids could have seen so and so play. Young Antonio McDyess was a fun player, and a lot of people thought like the heir apparent to Sean Kemp. It really good.
Yeah, very, very good. This podcast was very good. This is our last big full edition before the playoffs, right? Like we'll have another BbA bite coming up on Wednesday, but the playoffs on this shortened, adjusted season full of COVID and contact tracing and basketball players going to strip clubs and getting lemon pepper wings and like it.
That's every season. That's not indicative of this season. But
plus it's shortened, even though it's lengthened. Like this wild season, we're 4 games away from being done with it and finding out who's going to play for the Larry O'Brien. So that's it's kind of wild to think about after all this time. I would have been right with the Denver Nuggets winning the West. All right, Joel, until we get to our BbA bite on Wednesday, where can people find the video version of this here pod?
Yeah, there's this newfangled invention that all the young kids are talking about called YouTube. And if you're listening to us on the audios and you want the video side of it, we are indeed on YouTube. Just look us up, BbA or Basketball by Association. Please like, share, subscribe as we try to get the channel off the ground. If you are on YouTube and you need the audio-only version, you can find a Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you find your podcasts. And we are free. So come on in, share, like, subscribe, support the show. We love you.
Whoa, we're free?
We are free.
I love it. Hey, take advantage while it's can, because eventually we're going to charge you guys. So
right.
Yeah.
Probably Jeff Bezos level money. That's the goal, right?
Well, here's the thing. I would do a podcast for one guy if the one guy was paying Jeff Bezos money.
Right.
Like, I don't need a big audience. Like, if it's just Jeff Bezos and he's willing to pay, a few $100,000 a year for it, that's fine.
Yeah. Absolutely. Elgin Baylor, I hope we did you proud. Rest in peace. And episode 59 is in the books.